Alright, it's time to get started. You guys may have noticed that I'm not there in class today. We're going to start doing things over video for a variety of reasons, but the basic way that we do class isn't going to change very much. We're still going to go over the maps. I don't know what we're going to do about projects yet. We'll kind of think about that and work through things as the semester goes along. But we're going to pick kind of right up where we left off, except instead of going further over into Eastern Europe and Eurasia and Asia and all that area, we're going to go back and pick up a country that we kind of forgot about and we left out in the middle of the ocean. We're going to go and we're going to look at Iceland. But before we get into Iceland, what we're going to start doing each week is we're going to have some assignments that are due at the end of the week. They'll actually be due on Saturday by noon, but you can turn them in anytime during the week, and they'll just be questions that you'll get every Monday. And every week as we go through the different countries or look at different maps or various things, you'll be able to answer the questions as we go. If you want to get ahead, you can just go and look up information and find the answers to the questions, and you guys are going to email those things to me. And so that's something to look forward to each week as we're going through the information. You're going to want to make sure that you take notes. You're going to want to make sure that you pay attention. And I'm going to try and have maps available for you guys to download ahead of time in the future. This week we're not going to have any. And so if you have papers with you, you can kind of sketch out the countries and go over the regions that we're going to cover today and Friday. But when you're looking at Iceland and the other areas that we're going to be looking at, they're not very complicated. In fact, if you want to get a piece of paper out and you can start kind of sketching Iceland now, it just kind of looks like Pac-Man. And so we're going to be going over the different regions in Iceland. I would also suggest that when you get to the parts in the videos where you see the maps, that you pause them and that you go through and you actually write out the names in all of the different places. It's important for your learning and for your memory that you write these things out. Just seeing them and looking at them and hearing them is not enough. And even as you write out the names, it's not a bad idea to say them too as you're going over the maps. We spent a lot of time looking at the different regions and countries last semester. We're going to keep doing that, but in places that are interesting, like Iceland, we're going to spend a lot more time talking about the geological and geographical formations, because those are going to be kind of the things that make Iceland unique as compared to Kansas. And so when we start talking about Iceland and looking at what's going on there, we're going to begin to focus more on those things. We're going to also talk some about the history, in particular when that history reflects directly on the geography and geology of the regions, because that's going to be important when we look at the maps and where things are located and various things like that. One of the cool things about Iceland, before we get into the maps and things like that, and you'll see this as we look at pictures, is that Iceland isn't really that cold for where it's located. Now, that's relative, okay? They don't get very high temperatures. I mean, we're talking like an average temperature throughout the year is going to be like 45, 48 degrees Fahrenheit. And so, I mean, it doesn't get warm, but it's not really cold, especially considering the fact that it butts right up against the Arctic Circle. It's not, it's very far north. When you look at the map here that we've got, you can kind of see where Iceland is in relation to the other countries in Europe. Iceland is considered to be part of Europe, and how it kind of stacks up against those countries. You look at how far north it is. It's even there with Norway and Sweden and Finland, and those places get very cold. But Iceland, not so much. And so what's going to be happening is where Iceland is located, there's a Gulf Stream that runs through, and that water is actually going to give Iceland a pretty temperate climate. And so Iceland is going to be warm for where it's located. We would expect it to be covered with ice and permafrost and not very good for growing things. But Iceland actually has a pretty good temperate climate where you can raise various animals and you can actually grow crops throughout much of the year. And so it's pretty interesting considering where it's located. When we look at Iceland, just some of the geographical features or some interesting facts about it, it is the world's 18th largest island, and it's Europe's second largest island after Great Britain. So it's not very big when we think about how big it is. It's only about 39,000 square miles. It's not very big. A lot of it is tundra, 62%, 65% of it is tundra. And it's because there's a lot of mountains in the area. But, you know, that's still surprising for a country that's so far north. 14% of it's going to be covered, so roughly 15% or so is covered by lakes and glaciers. Different types of water is going to be covering about 15% of Iceland. Again, that's not really all that much when you consider that it's an island. It's just a really big island. It's one of the least populated or the most sparsely populated countries in Europe. There aren't very many people who live in Iceland. And so when we think about its size, there's relative to the number of people there are not very many people who live on Iceland. So let's just kind of look at a map. Here's your Pac-Man shape. You've got the mouth over here, and then you kind of have the body here. So it looks like maybe a Pac-Man wearing a crown. I don't know. You guys are always better at coming up with shapes for things than I am. But that's kind of your rough shape. You could even just draw a blob. I don't know. Maybe it looks like an amoeba. But for a long time, throughout its history, Iceland didn't really have regions. It's just recently in the more modern history of the island that it gets these administrative regions. There are 50 or so municipalities. I think the exact number is like 53 or something like that. Municipalities, and we are not going to learn those. Each one of these regions, these electorate regions, so these are the regions that will vote in the government. But these municipalities are what make up these different regions, and the local governments are really run at the municipal level, not the regional level. However, there is no possible way in the universe to pronounce the names of those municipalities, and you can't even spell them because they don't use English letters some of the times. And so we're just not going to learn those. It's outside of the scope of the class to make you go and learn a foreign language in order to be able to make your map. So we're just going to deal with these 6. It should be pretty easy for a quiz in the first week. Maybe on Friday, we'll see. And so you have the 3 big ones, right? The northwest, the northeast, and the south. Very creative there. And so if you just kind of look at Iceland and you divide it into those big 3 blocks, you have the northwest, which, you know, lo and behold, is in the northwest. The northeast is in the northeast, and the south, believe it or not, is actually the southern part of Iceland. And so in addition to those, you have over here, there's going to be 2 divisions. There's going to be Reykjavik North, Reykjavik South, and there's going to be Southwest. And so you have Reykjavik right around here, with Reykjavik North and Reykjavik South, and the southwest region here. Now the reason why you have Reykjavik divided into 2 is because it's an unbelievable amount of percentage of the population actually lives right there in Reykjavik. I mean, most of the people don't live, you know, over in these other parts where it's all mountains and glaciers, and a lot of the tundra is up in this region. And so a lot of the people live right here in Reykjavik. So you have to divide that up more because there's so many people you know, compared to the rest of the population of the island, just right here in this little different, little bitty region right there. Here is a map that you can look at. It's not a topographical map, but it kind of gives you an idea of what you're dealing with. You have some big mountains in the center of the island, and you have the lower lands towards the coastline where a lot of people live, and then you can see right down here over in Reykjavik. This is where all the people are located. Most of the people will live right in here. And so there's not a lot of travel. There's not much going on up here in the mountainous regions. Most of your stuff is going to be down here. When you look at travel or the economy of Iceland is going to largely come from tourism, and a lot of the tourism is going to be down here in these areas. And so there will be a few little things where maybe people will go up and look at the countryside and the mountains, but a lot of things are going to be down around Reykjavik. And actually quite a bit of Iceland's economy is based on tourism now. After they suffered in the 2008 global financial crisis, when you have governments and banks going under all over the world, they weren't exempt from that, and they suffered pretty significantly. And their economy is coming back now, largely due in part to tourism, because it's a very beautiful place. We're going to see some pictures in a little while, and it's just really incredible how beautiful Iceland is. In fact, interesting thing about its name is when the Norse travelers were coming over And they found Iceland. They called it that because they didn't want people to move there and take it from them. And so they called it Iceland. And then you have Greenland, which is not green at all. It's almost all ice. And they called that Greenland because they were trying to trick people into skipping over Iceland and moving over to Greenland, trying to lure people over in that direction to kind of get them to move out that way. It didn't work. There's not a lot of people in Greenland either. And so that's just kind of interesting how you see the different names. It's not really full of ice, even though it's called Iceland. So let's look down at some more of the regions when you're looking at the map. You don't have to know these. These aren't going to be on your map. It's just kind of helpful to have know places if you hear people talking about it. And really the only thing that you might need to have explained for you is, down here is the Reykjavik, the southwest region, and then you have the south, southeast, east, north, northeast, north, northwest, west. But then the thing you need to know about is the West Fjords over here with this northern, the crown part on the Pac-Man is the West Fjords. And so that's going to kind of do it for, what the maps look like. What I'd like for us to do now is just look at some pictures of the countryside, and you see just absolutely gorgeous the way that they have some of their constructions over there. They actually build the homes into hillsides. And the reason why they do it is to insulate it, because it's going to be cold in the winter. It's not going to get really warm in the summer. I mean, you're talking a high of like 50 degrees or so in the summertime. And so you insulate your homes like this. And in inclement weather, it keeps your home well insulated. You don't have to have big heaters. You can get by with a little fireplace with your home built into the earth like this. It also makes it last a really long time because stone lasts for, it's pretty permanent if you build something out of stone, and you can cover your roof with grass, and as long as you keep putting sod up there and you keep adding things to it, it's not going to rot through, and the grass will kind of keep the water out of your house. It'll wick it away from the house when you have it covered with grass like that. So it's a pretty neat construction technique, but it creates these beautiful homes that just blend right into the countryside. And not every house is like this in Iceland. There are many, many modern structures, especially when you get down to the Reykjavik area, but this is one of the things that people will go and see when they go to Iceland for tourism. You also have beautiful scenes like this throughout the country, especially as you're going up into the mountainous region. You have these rivers that just run through everywhere. Beautiful cut scenes like this with the rivers meandering through the stone. And then you have one of the things that Iceland is famous for actually is geysers. There's a lot of geothermal and geological activity in Iceland. And this actually is called Geysir, and it is the geyser from which the English word geyser comes from. And so this is the most famous geyser in the world, as far as its name is concerned, at least. And so people will come from the world over to come and see this geyser erupt. You can even see the guy right here. It must be really cool. He got a little thumbs up going over there in the picture. And so it's just neat to see these kinds of things. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the geography. Iceland is going to be located in the juncture of the North Atlantic and the Arctic Oceans, right? We had that Arctic Circle that we saw earlier in the map. In fact, maybe we can just click on back to that map for a second. You look right up here, the mouse pointer moving across the top of the map there. That's the Arctic Circle. There's the Arctic Ocean. Here's the North Atlantic Ocean. Arctic, North Atlantic, Arctic, North Atlantic. Why does it do that? Who knows? Some map maker decided here's the Arctic Ocean. So you have Iceland, and it's right here where the Atlantic and the North Atlantic and the Arctic Ocean meet. The island is is entirely south of the Arctic Circle, and it passes through. The Arctic Circle will pass through one of the smaller islands that makes up as part of Iceland. You can see it here, Grimsey. The Arctic Circle just passes right through there. But the mainland is entirely south of the Arctic Circle. Iceland is closer to Europe than it is to North America, so it's considered part of Europe for historical, political, cultural, and practical reasons. Geologically, the island is going to include parts of both continental plates. If you're going to break it up and look at tectonic plates, you're going to have a place where those plates collide, and that's why you have all these mountains. You're going to have a lot of volcanic activity. You're going to have a lot of geothermal activity because of where it is located on the cusp of a couple of the plates. Like we mentioned earlier, Iceland is the 18th largest island in the world. The main island, again, is about 100,000 kilometers square, or 39,000 miles square. And again, a lot of it's tundra. Over half of it will be tundra. There are 30 minor islands that are going to be part of Iceland. There's more than that actually around it, but there's 30 minor islands that we consider, that have names that aren't just like sandbars out in the ocean. Geologically, Iceland is going to be part of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, along which the oceanic crust spreads and forms new ocean crust. And so Iceland is moving along with the rest of the ocean floor. Some other things that are neat about Iceland is the number of fjords along the coastline. The fjords are all along the coastline, and the coastline of Iceland is about 3,000 miles long. So you go all the way around the coast, you got about 3,000 miles. Almost all the settlements are on the coastline, and the island's interior is mostly the highlands and mountains regions where it's difficult to get people to settle. So considering the geology of Iceland, let's go back and look at some more of these pictures. Here's again the geyser. We have a lot of geyser activity. You can see some more back here in the background, but the main one here is the main attraction. And along with the things like the geysers, you have what are called blue spas, or these these heated bodies of water along the coast that people can go swimming in all year round. So you can go to Iceland and they have these heated pools of water that you can go swimming in January. Now, mind you, when you get out of the water, it's very cold. It'll be down, around 30 degrees Fahrenheit when you get out of the water. So you got to get out and get dressed or get into a warm place pretty quickly. But you're here in the water, and the water's very warm. And so people will go swimming all year round in Iceland. And so it's kind of interesting that's another thing that people will go there for. People want to go swim in the water in the middle of January. So they'll go to Iceland and they'll go swimming in the water in the middle of January. Another famous thing in Iceland is its volcanic activity. There's lots of volcanoes on in Iceland. It's highly active as far as its volcanoes are concerned. And every once in a while they go boom. Back in the 1700s, 1800s, there was a huge eruption, and it killed a large portion of the population of people who live on Iceland. So it's not always safe to live there. It's never safe to live around volcanoes because you never know what's going to happen. But there is volcanic activity. There's currently volcanic activity in Iceland, kind of like living on Hawaii. It's just something you got to learn to deal with. Volcanoes are there. Volcanoes are going to be there, and they're always going to be there. Just kind of thinking about some of the climate and what it's like there. I have a chart that I'm going to look at and read to you real quick. It talks about some of the average temperatures. The average high in January is about 35 degrees. So you go outside, the high temperature, it's cool enough that it's going to be really cold, but it's warm enough that you may not have snow all over Iceland year round. And so you think Iceland, well, January, surely they're going to have snow on the ground. Not always. Their average temperature is 35 degrees for January. So sometimes it's warmer, sometimes it's cooler. And then you get to their summer months, July, you think, well, what's the heat of the summer going to be like in July and August? It's about 55 degrees. 55, 56 degrees. So again, it's not really warm, but it's not really cold either. It kind of stays, in a moderate temperature all year long. I mean, that's between the average high in the winter and the average high in the summer. That's a 15, 20 degree difference. And so you're not seeing a huge fluctuation in temperature. Even though it's a little bit on the cooler side, there's not a huge fluctuation. And so we consider to have a temperate climate where there's not a lot of shifting between the highs and the lows. In addition to that, Iceland has lots of biodiversity. There's a lot of animals in Iceland. We don't typically think of it having lots of animals, but there's quite a bit for such a small island. You can see some of the wildlife here, some of these horses that have been brought over there. The Arctic fox lives in Iceland. There's Icelandic sheep is another one of the famous animals that will live in Iceland. And so when we talk about what it's like to live there, it's a temperate climate with a pretty diverse ecosystem, and it's volcanically active, and there's not a lot of people when we talk about the people who are going to be living there. So let's talk for just a little bit about the economy in Iceland. Again, the shape It's located here as an island. It's up in the northern part of the Atlantic, close to the Arctic Ocean. What do you think are some things that its economy is going to be based on? So you can pause the video if you want and talk about it, or you can just keep going and I'll tell you. It'd be boring if you do that. So that's probably what you guys are going to do. It'll be boring. Just kidding. And so Iceland, being an island nation, just like the other island nations that we've talked about, a large part of its economy is going to come from the ocean. It kind of happens when you live on an island. And so they're going to historically have lots of fishing, lots of industries that deal with maritime stuff. There will be lots of shipping, lots of shipbuilding. There will be lots of whaling, lots of oiling from the whales. There are going to be perfume industry at one point in time. But a lot of their focus and their economy in the past had always come from the ocean. In more modern times, a lot of their economy is switching towards providing geothermal energy. They have all these, wonderful sources of energy that come up from the earth, and so they use a lot of geothermal energy in Iceland. They also have a lot of hydroelectric plants using the coming in and the going out of the tides or waterfalls or other things to produce electricity. And so a large part of their economy is production of electricity. In 2007, they were the seventh most productive country in the world. The average person in Iceland, and when you think about it, that's pretty significant. Not the average family, but the average person in Iceland. So certainly we're not talking about little kids. And so the average working adult might actually make more than this, but the average person had about $55,000 a year. That was their job. That's pretty high. It's the seventh highest in the world. We think Iceland, what do? Well, they have a wide variety of things that they're going to be doing now. They're going to be involved in a lot of technology now. They're going to be involved in a lot of health technology. A lot of people will go to Iceland when they're sick. They'll go there to look for things like that. And so Iceland is pretty neat to think about all the different things that are there. Another thing that we're going to try and do is try and learn a little bit about the cultures of these places as we're studying them throughout the year. When the Vikings or when the Norse people traveled over to Iceland, eventually they would bring with them Christianity. As they learned it and then they began to travel to other places, they would bring a type of Christianity with them. And so built into the Icelandic culture is this idea of the Yule time or Christmas time. And their Christmas time, their celebration of Christmas time, actually goes from around the 12th of December to the 6th of January. There are various Christian traditions where the 6th of January is called Epiphany. And there are many people who believe that Jesus was actually born on January 6th. And so it's kind of interesting to see they have kind of a merging of the two ideas, because they do celebrate Christmas on December 25th, and they also celebrate Epiphany on January 6th, and it's interesting. And so one of the things they do that I think is pretty neat is they have these little Yule lads, kind of like elves, sort of, for Santa Claus, but not. And they'll go around and they'll cause mischief for the 13 days leading up to Christmas, starting on December 12th, and then the 13 days after leading up to Epiphany. And so they're going to arrive in a series. They'll arrive one at a time, and then they'll leave one at a time. And what the children do is they'll take an old shoe and they'll set it on their windowsill at night. And if they behaved the day before, they'll get treats in their shoe from these little Yule lads. And if they misbehaved, they'll get rotten vegetables or something nasty like that. And each one of these Yule lads has a different personality. You can kind of see some of the different things that they do based on these pictures. This one is the sheep coat guy, and he likes to mess around with sheep. And so he kicks them and jumps on them and does stuff like that. This guy steals milk. This guy's very short. This guy steals your wooden spoons and licks them. I don't know why. I guess maybe that's a big faux pas in Iceland anyway. He steals your wooden spoons and licks them. Maybe he gives them back, maybe not. This guy steals your pots and licks those. This guy steals bowls and licks them. So apparently there's a fascination with licking things over in Iceland. This guy runs through your house and slams doors. This guy steals your yogurt and eats it. This guy steals your sausage. This guy is a peeping Tom. I know, it's weird. This guy sniffs doorways. Right. This guy steals your meat. This guy steals your candles. Now, the cool thing about the candles is they used to be made out of tallow, which meant that you could eat them. Now, I wouldn't recommend going around trying to eat candles today because we don't make them the same way that they used to. But back when he stole candles, not only could you light them up and, ooh, it's light, but you could also eat them. So they were edible light. It's kind of neat to think that you have edible light. These last two people are kind of like the Icelandic boogie people. These are the ones who run around and they give you stuff if you're nice, and they might give you rotten vegetables. But she is like the evil witch who steals bad children. You know, a lot of European countries would threaten their children with the gypsies. You know, you better behave or I'm going to sell you to the gypsies. Well, Icelandic parents will tell their children, you better behave or Grillia is going to come and she's going to steal you away. And so that's kind of how parents will scare their children into behaving, and they'll also coerce them with candy or rotten vegetables using these Yule lads. So that's just a little bit of the culture in Iceland. And as we continue to learn and we continue to see things, we'll learn more about it. What I would suggest you do is you go and you look back at the map of Iceland with these different territories. The only ones that are going to give you trouble are the Reykjaviks. And you have the northern Reykjavik, Reykjavik North, Reykjavik South. It's not that hard. Take the little Reykjavik region, divide it in half, north and south, and then you have the southwestern region, which goes all through here, and it's based off of populations. So even though it's disjointed right here, these are kind of the same place because it's dealing with these cities or these locuses of populace, of population in Iceland. And again, here's the location, and so you can kind of see where it is in relation to the rest of Europe. And that's why it's considered part of Europe, because it's closer to Europe than it is to the United States. Interesting thing about Iceland is it became a republic. Another interesting thing about it is it became a republic in 1946. Up until then, it was loosely linked to Denmark and Norway and Finland and other Scandinavian countries. Became independent in 1944, and it became a republic in 1946. And so it had a king for 2 years. Up until that point, it was controlled by different people. The British actually invade it in 1941, and the United States will then come and occupy it in 1942 in World War II. So the United States kind of invaded Iceland in World War II. Thankfully, for the most part, they've forgiven us for that, and so we can just kind of forget that happened when it comes to our relationship with them politically. But after we're done with Iceland, we're going to continue our move through Europe, working our way towards Asia and Africa and other places throughout the world. So y'all look over the maps, kind of review the stuff we've talked about. If you have any questions, why don't y'all talk about in class? Maybe questions you might have, and send those my way. You can email them to me, and I'll get them answered. For Iceland, we're not going to do any food or anything like that, but maybe you can make some ice and put it in a drink or something. And so that'll pretty much finish up Iceland, and I'll see you guys on Friday.